Happy Sabbath day, brethren. It's nice to be back and welcome to our Bible study this afternoon. Brethren, when bad things happen to us, usually unexpectedly like COVID-19, what comes to your mind? These days, it is COVID-19 and we are told to stay home to be safe. I am sure you had trials previously, and there may be more in the future. I hope we are not like Job's wife, who was quick to put the blame on God or question God. Many people do blame God for their misfortunes, but we know Job was not one of them. And we should be like Job, brethren. What good is there for us in trials and sufferings? Why does God allow us to suffer sometimes? Does He abandon us when we fall into trials? This coronavirus lockdown due to health emergency and the corresponding financial and travel difficulties we are experiencing right now may be just a foretaste of yet more difficulties that lie ahead of us, brethren. This afternoon, we are going to discuss Israel's entrance to and exit out of Egypt. And that is the title of this Bible study, brethren. Israel's entrance to and exit out of Israel. I would like to show you from the pages of the Bible that the tribulations in the lives of those afflicted were allowed by God for the purpose, for His plan. We shall be reading from the pages of the Bible, mainly Genesis 37, 39, and Exodus chapter 2. These are accounts of events surrounding Israel's entry into and exit out of Egypt in the lives of Joseph and Moses. And we'll see for ourselves God's hand in those events, showing that He is always in control. That God allows sufferings in our lives not to torment us, but to develop in us His righteous character. In his book titled The Incredible Human Potential, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong wrote in page 68, "Remember, God's purpose in creating man is to reproduce Himself with such perfect spiritual character as only God possesses, who will not and therefore cannot sin. This is supported in Scripture in 1 John chapter 3 verse 9. 1 John chapter 3 verse 9. It says, "Whoever is born of God does not commit sin, for his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of God." And in page 77 of the same book he wrote, quote, "When newly converted, one is now a spiritual embryo. Now he must be nourished and fed on spiritual food. Jesus said, man must not live by bread or physical food alone, but by every word of God." The Bible, brethren, we know, is the written word of God, just as Christ is the personal word of God. This growth is the character development that requires time and comes largely by experience. Experience, brethren. The need for experience in character development is affirmed in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 to 4. Romans 5, verses 3 to 4 says, "And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope." This scripture, brethren, is saying that we need to go through tribulations to develop patience. Then when we have developed patience, then we had experience. Then when we have experienced what needed to be experienced, we shall have hope. Hope of what, brethren? Hope of entrance to eternal life and the kingdom of God. Tribulations or tests and trials are never pleasant, but they are necessary for us to gain the needed experience. No pain, no gain, as the saying goes, for those trying to develop physical muscles. You need to flex your muscles towards the current limit so that your body system would develop that extra thread of muscle to make you stronger. But doing so, brethren, makes you experience some pain. Thus, if you do not experience pain, then expect no muscular gain. With those things in mind, brethren, let us examine the lives of Joseph and Moses as recorded in the pages of the Bible. What did they go through to gain the necessary experiences needed for them to fulfill their roles in God's plan? Each of us has a role, brethren, in God's plan. It is easy to talk about this when times are normal. But when disaster strikes us, we sometimes find ourselves at a loss, and we may wonder if God has forgotten about us. Joseph and Moses, as we know them already, both lost their privileged status when disasters happened to them. Joseph, the favorite son of Jacob, lived a comfortable life in the house of his father, who loved him very much. But he was sold into slavery by the hands of his own brothers. And Moses lost his royal lifestyle when he fled Egypt. Why? How are their roles connected when they lived at least 350 years apart? What lessons can we glean from their sufferings and experiences? Let's read about Joseph first, since he lived ahead of Moses. In Genesis chapter 7, let's start from verse 1. Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. What was that again, brethren? Joseph reported to their father the bad deeds of his brothers. Now, continue on verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. Brethren, loving Joseph more than all his children is showing favoritism. The result is not good for the children, as pointed out by the next verse. verse 4. It said, "And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more, more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." Division, brethren, resulted among the children. Favoritism is not good when among jealous individuals. And this situation was made worse by Joseph telling his siblings his dreams. Verse 5. "And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more." Brethren, Joseph had several dreams, and we know now that those were true. But perhaps it was the way that he told his brothers about those dreams that irritated them. Or perhaps he should have kept it to himself. Now let's jump to verse 11. "And his brethren envied him." In Galatians 5 verse 21, envy is listed as one of the fruits of the flesh which we need to overcome. In verse 12, and his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, "Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them." And he said to him, "Here I am." And he said to him, "Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren and well with the flocks, and bring me word again." So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Let's jump to verse 18 now, chapter 37, verse 18. "And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him." And jumping again to verse 23, "And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him." Verse 26, "And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. Then his brothers hid the truth from their father. Verse 31, "And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, This have we found. Now know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." That is a lie, of course, because they took the coat from Joseph by force. And jumping to verse 36, "And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard." Brethren, what was Joseph's mistake that they should hate him so much? First, he was what we may call sip-sip, because he reports to their father their wrongdoings. Telling the truth when in a crowd of jealous people may not be a good idea. Second, their father favored him more than the other children. Third, his dreams made him their boss. The other sons probably thought the dreams were made up, not true, or that they saw Joseph as a boastful little brother. They hated him so much they wanted to kill him. But Judah proposed to sell him instead of kill him. And how did Joseph reacted to all of these bad events in his life, brethren? The Bible account did not record Joseph resisting or fighting or kicking. Did Joseph knew what was going on? Maybe. Did God tell him in a dream? Maybe. But we cannot find such a record. But like his great-grandfather Abraham, Joseph just went along. How about us, brethren? When bad things happen to us, do we find ourselves kicking, resisting, fighting for our rights? Or are we like Joseph and his grandpa Abraham? Do we just go along? In this world, brethren, people fight for their rights, and in a democracy, it is highly recommended that we assert our rights. Some even riot and destroy things to show their anger, to vent their anger. Which kind of reaction do you think, brethren, God wants from us? Joseph was like a lamb silent before his tormentors, like Jesus Christ before his accusers. That is how God expects of us, brethren. Patience in the face of adversity. Remember, to suffer long. It is not easy, brethren, but Joseph and Jesus Christ are our examples. Now, let's turn to chapter 39. Chapter 38 was all about Judah. Chapter 39 returns the story to Joseph. Verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Personally, brethren, I would say that Joseph's needs were taken care of. Let's continue verse 3. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Now let's jump to verse 6. And he Potiphar, left all that he had in the hands of Joseph, and he knew not what he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored. Now, is being good looking, brethren, a disadvantage for Joseph? Verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Brethren, it is clear here Joseph fears God and obey his commandments. And this explains why God is with him and prospered him. Let's continue verse 10. And it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. Brethren, hindi niya pinatulan si Mrs. Potiphar. And look what followed. Verse 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. And there was none of the men of the house there within. So, it is not good to be alone with a possible temptress, brethren, or even a simple temptation, or any tempting situation. Verse 12. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. Worse, brethren, don't leave your clothes in a situation like that, because she used it as an evidence against Joseph. Now let's drop to verse 17. And she spoke unto him, to her husband Potiphar, when he returned, according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. We know, brethren, that is a lie. And let's continue verse 19. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. Again, brethren, we do not find Joseph here fighting for his rights. Verse 21, But the Lord was with Joseph, and shewed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Joseph, brethren, was made once again in charge, this time of all the prisoners. So we see a pattern here. Wherever Joseph goes, he becomes in charge, because the person who is in charge there can see that God was with him, and whatever he does, God prospers in his hand. So in this situation again, although he was thrown into prison, Joseph was made in charge of all the prisoners. In fact, brethren, we know of two individuals, two of our brethren who are right now in a similar situation with Joseph. They are in prison, and they are made in charge of the rest of the prisoners around them. Let's continue to verse 22. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Now, chapter 40, brethren, told us of how Joseph encountered Pharaoh's chief butler, and the chief baker, right there in prison. Then one day Joseph was concerned because he observed them to be sad, and he asked why. They each then had a dream, told him of their dreams, and Joseph interpreted the dreams for these two officers. And after 3 days, during the birthday of Pharaoh, the chief baker was executed by hanging for his crime, while the chief butler was restored to his job, according to the interpretation of Joseph. And in verse 14 of chapter 40, we read of Joseph asking a favor from the butler. Verse 14, chapter 40, Genesis. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and shew kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away of the land of the Hebrews, and here also in this prison have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Brethren, that is all the record of Joseph's complaint, if you would call it a complaint at all. Did Joseph deserve to be enslaved because he was his father's favorite son? Or because he told them his dreams? Or because he reported all their wrongdoings? Or was it his fault that he was handsome and his master's wife lusted after him to sleep with him? Among the jealous people, giving someone better treatment is seen as wrong. But the righteous, we know, the righteous is happy when someone is given a huge favor. But not so with jealous people. Many men could not resist beautiful women, married or not. Ask King David or Solomon. But Joseph resisted Mrs. Potiphar, kept himself a virgin, and landed in jail. And he did not complain one bit. He did not lose hope. Free or slave, Joseph obeyed God, and that is why the Lord was with him and prospered him. He experienced everything God had prepared for him to experience, never resisting what God allowed him to suffer, and developed godly character and the necessary skills in the process. And when it was time, God made him second in command in Egypt. Genesis chapter 41 told of Pharaoh's dream. 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine. Then, at last, the butler remembered Joseph after 2 full years. He told Pharaoh about Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. Joseph was 17 years old when his tribulation, his intense training started, as recorded in Genesis 37 verse 2. At that stage in life, we find him unnecessarily telling people about himself, boastful and proud. When he emerged out of prison at the age of 30, he was a different man, mature and responsible to manage Egypt's economy in times of abundance and in times of famine. It is under this setting that Israel entered Egypt because of the famine. There they prospered and grew in number. Joseph understood that he got to Egypt by God's design to prepare a place for God's people. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 19, Genesis 50, verse 19, it says, "And Joseph said unto them," this was when after the death of their father, his brothers were afraid of him that um, he might retaliate for what they have done to him years earlier. And Joseph said unto them, "Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive." Joseph's brethren understood that God used the occasion to prepare for the entrance of Israel into Egypt by sending him there ahead of time. In fact, 13 years or 13-year training period. And how many of Israel's family members entered Egypt during the famine? Exodus chapter 1 verse 5 tells us how many. It says 70 souls, for Joseph was already in Egypt. So, was Joseph's tribulation for nothing, brethren? No. It was God's plan to provide a grand entrance for his people into the land of Egypt. All those trials allowed him to learn from direct experience all the necessary skills and strength of character required to rule in a position that might be called now as a prime minister managing Egypt's economy. All Joseph's sufferings early in life must have become as nothing when he began to rule. Now fast forward 350 years or so after Jacob entered Egypt with his entire family. A boy was born under an adverse condition because every male child born at the time was ordered to be killed. Let's pick up the story in Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, starting verse 1. "And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. They were of the same family or the same tribe." Verse 2, "And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink." Verse 4, "And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along to the river's side. And when she saw the ark along the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew woman, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the women took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, Because I drew him out of the water. And it came to pass, verse 11, in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand. You see this, brethren, Moses was rather impulsive and quick-tempered, impatient. Verse 13, And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Verse 15, Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Verse 16, Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the trough to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them, and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel their father, he said, How is it that you are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. And he said, And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. Now, brethren, did God acted on the cries and groanings of Israel only when the Pharaoh that wanted to kill Moses had died? Did God remember his covenant with the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob only when the Israelites groaned because of the oppression? The answer, brethren, is no. God designed the birth of Moses to be so that Moses can be and was transplanted or adopted into the house of Pharaoh to be trained in the skills and wisdom of Egypt. But when he was of age, he needed some more training, and God sent him to the house of Jethro to learn the skills of a shepherd. According to Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, Moses was about 40 years old when he fled Egypt, and he tended Jethro's flock another 40 years because he was 80 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 7 verse 7 says, "And Moses was fourscore years old," that's 80, brethren, "and Aaron fourscore and 3 years old," because Aaron was his older brother, "when they spoke unto Pharaoh." For 40 years, Moses learned the skills of a shepherd, and God had his character refined in the wilderness. Numbers 12 verse 3 called him the meekest man on earth. Numbers 12 verse 3, it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth." Now at this point, Moses was ready for the role God trained him for, to lead his people Israel out of Egypt. Moses was raised as a prince by Pharaoh's daughter. He was learned in all the wisdom of Egypt, which was the most advanced nation on earth at the time. A secular, non-biblical account recorded him as a successful general who once laid siege of an Ethiopian city. The local Ethiopian princess, under siege, offered herself in marriage to the general, to Moses, in exchange for peace. And it was said that Moses obliged and married the Ethiopian princess. Brethren, this is a non-biblical account, but in Numbers 12 verse 1, we read, Numbers 12 verse 1, "And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman." The marriage probably happened in the first 40 years of his life as a prince or general in Egypt. We don't know for sure about this. But when Moses left Egypt, all the royal privileges was lost, and he lived the life of a shepherd in the wilderness, leading a flock of sheep instead of an army, and that was for 40 years. After 40 years, Moses, the quick-tempered man, was turned into the meekest, patient, humble man. Combined with the skills and wisdom of the most advanced nation on earth, Moses was now ready to shepherd God's people out of Egypt. Now, did God acted only when his people cried and groaned after Pharaoh died? No, brethren. 80 years earlier, God had set in motion a training program for a boy to be adopted into Egypt's royal family, be trained as a prince, even as a general in some secular account, then refined his character in the wilderness, caring for a flock of sheep until the fullness of time. When people are enjoying the good life, we say they are blessed by God. Does it follow then that when people experience bad things, that they are punished by God? That was the quick conclusion of Job's three friends. God did made it clear, though, that He punishes the evildoers. But not all adversities come as a punishment. Some of them are sent to refine our character, to make one more fruitful. Jesus said in John chapter 15, verses 1 to 2, John chapter 15, verses 1 to 2, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Get that, brethren? Such is the case of Joseph and Moses. They both lost their privileged status in life. Joseph went into slavery and then to prison, all in the space of 13 years. Moses tended sheep for 40 years. When the fullness of time, according to God's plan, came, they each fulfilled their important roles. Joseph as second in command in Pharaoh's Egypt, facilitated the entrance of Israel into Egypt, while Moses led the exit of Israel out of Egypt. And where in the Bible does it say that there is such a need for entrance and exit of Israel to and from Egypt? Please open with me to Genesis 15, brethren. Genesis 15, verses 13 to 14. Genesis 15, verses 13 to 14. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. There, brethren, you see there an entrance and an exit. In this verse, of course, the nation was not named, but we know now that the nation referred to is Egypt. Brethren, for the people of God whom He called, there is nothing that happens in our lives that God is not aware of. He is aware of every sparrow that falls to the ground, and He knows how many hairs there are in our heads. He knows what is happening in our respective lives right now. He knows our sorrows, our sufferings, our yearnings, our desires. He knows our secrets and weaknesses too. That is why He knows what we still need to learn and develop. And only through experiencing tribulations and hardships can some of His characteristics be developed in us. There is no other way. Unpleasant though they may be, but trials, tests, and tribulations are a very important part of the character development process, brethren. Like developing muscles, if there is no pain, then there can be no muscular gain. Character development necessitates hard choices, which often is accompanied with pain and suffering. But those pain and sufferings are only temporary until we are accustomed to or accepted what God wants us to have. While agonizing and struggling through pain, it might be comforting to know that this pain is only temporary and is necessary for character development, and that God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13 verse 5. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13 verse 5. If God is aware of our sufferings, why does He not cut it short or abolish it altogether? Brethren, we may find the answer when agonizing through His impending crucifixion. Christ asked the Father in prayer to let the cup pass from Him. But Jesus said, Your will, Father, be done. Altering pieces of the plan would defeat the purpose of God's master plan. But the Son allowed Himself to learn obedience by the sufferings which He experienced. God has a master plan, and it needs to be followed, brethren. And tribulation has an important part of the plan. It is required for character development. James chapter 1 verse 2 says, James chapter 1 verse 2, Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. I am reading from the New International Version. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Remember, perseverance and long suffering. You cannot develop it without suffering for a while, for a long time. While in pain, we can take encouragement, brethren, knowing that God knows our situation. Luke chapter 12 verse 6, Luke 12 verse 6 says, Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings, and not one of them is forgotten before God? But even the very hair of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. God knew, brethren, for example, Job's suffering. Yet God allowed Job to suffer until what God was looking for finally came out. The same is true with Joseph, with Moses, and with every one of us, brethren, no exemption. But God is always in control. Every trial, no matter how severe it could feel at the moment, are designed for character development. And God is faithful, brethren. He will control the level of difficulty that He allows us to go through. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. Again, I'm reading from NIV. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Brethren, God will control the level of difficulty He allows us to undergo. For example, if you are a grade 1 pupil, God will only give you a grade 1 level test. When you become first year high school, God will give you tests fit for a first year high school, and so on. He is the most perfect examiner there is in the universe because he is faithful and true. All the tests, trials, sufferings, and tribulations, brethren, that Joseph and Moses went through finally ended at the end of their training. Joseph's suffering was 13 years. 13 years of slavery and imprisonment. That ended. Moses' training was 40 years. A long time, 40 years, 4 decades. But that ended too. Short or long, brethren, every trial come to an end because they are temporary. Our trials with coronavirus, this lockdown is also temporary. And it's barely 4 months old. It shall end soon enough. But know, brethren, that there may be more in the near future. In our individual lives, we each will have to undergo our own trials, tribulations, and with each tribulation, with each trial, pain and suffering. And brethren, it would depend on what the kind of trials and testing God will give us will depend on what we are hiding in our closet. For God knows every secret. In summary, brethren, I have here 3 points in my summary. God, number 1, God is true to His words and is always in control. This is shown in His plan for over 400 years. God planned and moved events to fulfill His promise to Abraham to multiply Abraham's descendants in a nation that would oppress them. We know now that nation was Egypt. The sufferings of Joseph and Moses were allowed by God for them to refine their character. Joseph, when he qualified and when the proper time came, facilitated the entrance of Israel into Egypt, while Moses, when he was refined and when the time came, facilitated the exit of Israel out of Egypt. This fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham using Joseph and Moses is a testimony that God is always in control, in that He can move events to fulfill His words. Number 2, we gain character through tests and trials. These are necessary to see if we already have developed that character God is looking for in us. God do not abandon us during trials. Instead, He is managing our experiences. And number 3 lessons, brethren. Number 3 are 3 lessons worth remembering from this study. 1, tests and trials and tribulations are necessary for character development. No one can escape that. 2, God controls the level of difficulty of our tests. And 3, God will never leave us nor forsake us, because it is His plan to bring us all unto glory. Brethren, if you have any questions about this topic or related to it, you are welcome to post it in our FB group chat. I and the other elders shall endeavor to answer your questions. If, however, the issue is sensitive, we shall discuss it in private messages. Happy Sabbath, brethren.